Next, we're coming back to Idaho, but this is a regional story that is very much a global story. Idaho has incredible roadless areas, incredible wilderness. We have the highest, clearest rivers for the iconic salmon to be born and to return to and continue the cycle. The salmon are an icon in the Northwest for their own value of this incredible creature that comes 900 miles, up I believe 7,000 feet, over 8 dams to central Idaho to come home to where they were born. And as you can imagine, the challenges of warming waters, the challenges of those dams, our salmon are going away, and we are right on the verge. And so you're going to be hearing from the top scientists about these salmon. You're going to be hearing about tribal interests who have a right to fish these salmon as they have for millennia, that the government is violating by not ensuring that that right is protected. You're going to be hearing from the leaders who really understand where we are and what we need to do to bring these salmon back. Our governor here in Idaho had a working group on this, so there's a lot of discussion happening, and we have a congressional leader from Idaho who wants to bring our salmon back. And as we look at global warming and what we need to do to shift our human interaction and our infrastructure with species in order to create resilient systems, Idaho's salmon, I believe, are a model for what we must do in order to realign our priorities for a resilient future and for an ecosystem. These salmon, they bring the groceries of the ocean to this very fragile high desert ecosystem. And the fires we're seeing, we need our salmon to restore these ecosystems. We need them back. So with that, I'm obviously very passionate about this. I want to bring our salmon home. And I'm so happy to introduce our panel. I'm David Eichberg from HP, real leader in sustainability and climate, based right here in Boise, is going to be moderating our session. Please join me in welcoming the whole panel to the stage. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you everybody here for joining us today on the third day of the forum. And to all the organizers at the Sun Valley Forum and the Sun Valley Institute. I'm really pleased today to be able to host and pinch hit in for Mitch Cutter at the Idaho Conservation League on just a really, really important discussion that we have around resiliency here in the Pacific Northwest at the nexus of salmon, energy, and local economies in the face of climate change. And in this today, to have this discussion, I'm really pleased to be joined by a wonderful panel here that we have made up with Russ Thurow, who is the fisheries research scientist at the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station, just up in Salmon, right over the pass, not too far away. Chantel Greene, who's the CEO and founder of Xexus, if I got that right, Energy. She's just launching this in a role now to lead the innovations coming out of the Nez Perce tribe work, where she's formerly a vice chairwoman on the Nez Perce Council, and also continues to serve in a capacity as a director on the Gaming Commission there in the Nez Perce Enterprise. And Jim Norton, who is a project coordinator with Columbia Rediviva. He also has a career working in impact-based investing, serves with me on the ICL board, and as a river guide as well. And as we get started, I think it's be most useful for us to orient ourselves here in place and around the issue. And here we're looking at a map of the Salmon River drainage. You can see the river leading out there, the Columbia to the Pacific Ocean. Now we are over here just below this big amount of green. In fact, if you joined us up at the Galena Lodge last night, if you'd gone a few more miles up the hill, you'd go over the pass, come to an overlook, you could look down at the headwaters of the Salmon, and as it winds down through, you can see it connecting in with the Snake, and then the Columbia, and these 8 little black triangles representing the dams there along the way. And if we're speaking here about salmon, just briefly, we consider the salmon life cycle, where they are born here up again in the high mountains and in the green, and after about a year, they travel downstream past all these 8 dams out into the ocean, where they live for 2 to 5 years, and then take this return journey all the way back up as they can, if they can, through these dams to their birthplaces there in the high mountain lakes and streams in order there to spawn and to die. And where we'll really be focused here in discussion today is on these impacts of what are called the 4 lower Snake River dams that you can see just in the center there above the line of Washington and Oregon. And then when we talk about the fish populations in particular, we're going to really focus in on 2 species around those of the, here you see a chart of wild populations of the Chinook and steelhead over about the past 50 or so years. Now these were populations that used to be running here, in the millions, 5 millions and more on their returns. And there's a lot of factors, of course, as we'll hear from us and others, that are impacting the fish populations. But these dams are clearly having a significant impact in that precipitous decline that we can see from the 60s to now just a fraction down to returns of only around 20,000 a year that we're seeing amongst those 2. And that's well below these targeted dotted line regional and state adopted targets for those populations. And these 2 species, in fact, are probably fairly doing relatively better than the Chinook, which has gone extinct, and as well as I'm going to run this video now to help lay a bit more of the context too around the energy transition we're seeing.
My name is Jesse Layton, and I'm the executive director of the Nez Perce Tribe. In 2016, Bonneville Power put out a study that the 4 lower Snake dams required 5,311 megawatts of power to offset the energy created by those dams. In our minds, those dams are driving our salmon runs to extinction. And we, as the Nez Perce Tribe, decided that we wanted to put forth the goal that we ourselves put in the renewable energy systems to create that power. We know there's a point at which the dams are going to become more costly to operate than the amount of energy they produce. We know that's happening at some point in the future. I don't know if it's 50 years down the road or 10 years down the road, but we know that there needs to be a replacement plan for those dams. And our thought is that we, not just us again, not just the Nez Perce Tribe, but we as tribes collectively can come together to generate that much power to basically render those dams obsolete so that our fish runs can get back to the way they used to be. There's no need for them once we get to that point.
Somebody commented that when Lewis and Clark first came here, they said the fish were so thick in the river that they could almost walk across the river on the backs of the fish. I would love to see our salmon back like that.
Well, basically they're telling us that these dams are too important to remove and that this energy would need to be replaced before you could remove these.
For tens of thousands of years, we've survived off our salmon runs. And in a matter of decades, those dams have been an impediment that have absolutely decimated those fish runs to near extinction.
We as salmon people have taken into consideration the amounts of power that the lower Snake River dams are generating and would look to replace that power with solar power.
With climate change and everything going on in the world right now, it's so important that we're going to alternative energy and to be really an innovator in this region.
I think when that study came out and we saw that number, 5,311 megawatts of power required, that 5311 really stuck in our minds.
Basically gave us a kick on the butt and said, hey, if you guys really want to do something, well, here's the number that you need to replace. We took it from there and said, well, let's charge with it.
5311 just became sort of our northern star, and we ran with it.
The number that we're looking for at replacing the nameplate capacity is far exceeds the capacity that they currently use.
we really felt like we just needed to kind of take charge of at least a piece of moving in that direction ourselves rather than relying on outside entities to do that for us. So we felt like with what we were doing in renewable energies, it was just a good fit.
You know, through battery technology and the advancements in solar and the availability of solar and the price of solar is just making that more and more feasible.
That first project generated so much excitement with the whole tribe that we knew that was just the beginning of what we wanted to do.
So our then vice chairman at the time developed our first solar installations here on the reservation. It included our community center, our Boys and Girls Club, and our Veterans Center, and our wastewater treatment facility. That was our first generation of electricity and capturing the energy of the sun.
Today is such a totally amazing experience. We have been told today that this is the first Tesla pack in the state of Idaho and possibly the Northwest. And it is such an experience that the Nez Perce tribe is the one that brought this to Idaho and is the first to experience a Tesla power pack.
It's extremely exciting, not only to create this new energy company, this energy cooperative that's going to bring tribes together to accomplish what we need to accomplish, but it's going to employ more tribal members than we ever imagined.
At first, I didn't want to do it because I'm kind of afraid of heights, but I started getting used to it, and I enjoyed the work. Before I did this, I built fence, 20 plus years, and yeah, this is a lot easier than building fence.
This is a community that truly needs meaningful, well-paid work, not just on the reservation, but off reservation. There are a lot of hungry people in the inland Northwest, and new jobs and new careers is a kind of hope that's desperately needed.
It's not just, a job, and especially right now with, a lot of people's jobs are, in limbo or they're not working right now. But the other part, we're actually doing something good for the environment, for our people. Yeah, if the jobs keep coming in, I would definitely stick with it. And I'd encourage other people to get into it too.
Yeah, it could not only help the tribe financially and the tribal members financially by deleting the electrical bills, but it could also help with bringing back the fish. In fact, at the beginning of the project, somebody brought up that for every panel we put in, we could bring back one salmon. So we'd like to put in many, many panels and bring back many, many salmon.
Originally, the 5311 plan started, and it was a big picture plan. We knew that 5,311 megawatts of power was too big for us to bite off, because we put a price tag to that, and it was like $6 billion. So we knew we weren't going to accomplish that right here at home by ourselves. So what we did was we decided to take off a big chunk of that and try to accomplish that right here at home. So we chose 10%. So we decided instead of 5311, we were going to do 531 megawatts right here on our reservation. Revolution had been working in the state of Hawaii with swell energy on their virtual power plant. That concept of the virtual power plant is what really made us realize that we could accomplish the 5311, because it didn't need to be just us, Nez Perce tribe, trying to do that ourselves. We knew with that technology of a virtual power plant or distributed power plant that we could get other tribes to become a part of it as a sort of a network, so we could connect all these systems together and collectively come to that 5311. Nimiku Energy is for not to just being an energy company for us here on our reservation, but it's we're setting it up to be a tribal cooperative so that other tribes are going to be able to connect into that, and we can provide the assistance for them to do it as much or as little help they need.
This emerging technology and opportunities that are before us now is going to be something that all the tribes will look into, I'm sure, and many tribes will move forward on it because of the opportunities to help the planet and to help, you know, their specific resources and life sources that they depend on within their own nations. And that's where our heart is, and that's where our spirit is. So that's where we place our strength into doing these things and accomplishing these things. And when we're of one mind and one spirit, our hearts are there, we're going to do these things, and we're going to do them well, and we're going to do them to save the salmon.
The concept of the cooperative is so that other tribes can do what we're doing and connect into our virtual power plant, because the capacity, that's where the storage part of it comes into place, is the battery. The storage capacity just keeps adding to each other as we get bigger and bigger, and that's not just us, but when another tribe puts in similar type system on their reservation and the battery storage that goes with it connects into our virtual power plant, the overall, you know, co-op just becomes bigger and bigger. So we really see it as a benefit to tribes that might not necessarily have, let's say, gaming, for example, on their reservations, because there's a lot of tribes out there that just don't have that business structure or the population base that's needed to run a successful gaming operation. But every tribe out there is in the sunshine.
Such an inspiring solution. I love the idea of every panel for another fish and a virtual power plant and a real innovation. Let's again hear a little bit from the panel and kind of take the issue in some different pieces here. And I thought, Russ, we could start with you, and you could tell us a little bit about what is the state of the salmon in the Snake River at this time, and particularly perhaps around the Middle Fork, and how does that contrast with the rest of the Columbia River Basin? What do salmon need to survive?
So I'm going to start out giving you a little context historically. So the Columbia Basin that we're part of here in Idaho was historically the most productive Chinook salmon habitat in the world. Estimated 10 to 16 million adult salmon returned every year, 2 to 6 million of those into the Snake River. And if you haven't been to Stanley, I'd urge you to take the drive. This is what it used to look like in Stanley Basin. And look at the size of those fish. So immense numbers. I'm going to talk more specifically about the Middle Fork Salmon River, which is within central Idaho, right there. And it's a very large basin. It has exceptional habitat because the bulk of it lies within the Frank Church Wilderness. It also has unique native fish, no hatchery fish in the Middle Fork. And it has very high elevation habitat that I'll talk about here in a minute. So what's the current status? Literally, the Grim Reaper has our fish and is walking off with our fish. Here's a quote: "Snake River salmon and steelhead are at increasing risk of extinction, even though a vast area of high-quality natal habitat remains." That's primarily within that Frank Church Wilderness I mentioned. Another quote: "Today, only 1 to 2% of historic wild salmon and steelhead numbers return, and all populations face extinction." Why? Well, here's a plot of 1957 through 2021. These are spring-summer Chinook, and you can see that steep trajectory. These blue stars represent so-called passable dams on the Columbia built above Bonneville. And with 4 dams in place, even though the runs had declined from historical levels, we still had robust runs. As the 4 lower Snake dams were added, you could see that's pretty much coincident with that steep decline. And I'm going to come back and talk about this spike that occurred in the early 2000s here in a minute. Here's another quote. Fishing was, I guess that's cut off. Basically, exceptional fishing through the 50s and 60s, and not by coincidence, began to steeply decline about the time the last shovel of dirt went into Lower Granite Dam in the early 1970s. Lower Granite was the last dam that was built. Another quote, this is by Idaho Fish and Game biologist in 1974. "Idaho's steelhead anglers were dealt a severe blow with the unprecedented emergency closure of the state's waters to fishing." And then he goes on to say, "The foremost killer of our salmon and steelhead is recognized as the Snake and Columbia River dams." And that continues today. And in basins downriver that are passing 3 or 4 dams, those runs are still robust. Above 8 dams, all of the stocks are at risk of extinction. So salmon resiliency can inform what we can have in the future. And what is resiliency? It's basically the ability to withstand negative conditions that would have long ago driven these stocks to extinction, and conversely, ability to respond when conditions improve. Here's some information from work we did in the Middle Fork. Wild Chinook in the Middle Fork produce among the most recruits per spawner, those are progeny, returning adults, ever reported in scientific literature. And that's clear evidence of resiliency. It's linked to the high habitat quality we've been talking about and also their great egg production. Our average female Chinook produces more than 5,000 eggs. So every additional 20, 50, 100 adults, it's a huge potential increase in abundance. More evidence of resiliency. That spike here on the, right there, that occurred in 2001, 2002, 2003. And it was a result of two things: more runoff, more snowpack, faster travel time through the hydro system, more smolts survive in those cases. And then there was a corresponding upturn in ocean productivity, cold water upwelling, more food. And that was a 5-fold increase in adults that returned those 3 years. And look where it came from, those really, really low returns in the late 90s. So that's clear resiliency. The bad news is it didn't persist. From 03 to 06, we had a 10-fold decline because of factors that cause these fish to be at risk of extinction, specifically the changes in the in the migration corridor, are the reasons. But that's really good news because these fish are still very resilient. Third example, Sunbeam Dam, just over the hill again in Stanley, was built in 1910. It was in place till 1934 when it was blasted. By 1941, salmon were again returning to Sawtooth Valley and Stanley Basin. By 1946-48, spawning streams were again full of salmon. Here's a photograph of a honeymoon in Stanley in 1946. And look at the fish. So basically, in 12 to 14 years, wild salmon resiliency increased from 0 fish because of sunbeam to robust runs. So that, again, is that demonstrated resiliency. And we also have strongholds of habitat in the upper basin. 40% of the public land in the Snake is within wilderness. It contains 50% of the cold water habitat for anadromous fish in the Columbia. And by 2080, with warming of low elevations, it's going to contain 65% of that cold water habitat. So the building blocks for recovering these stocks are all in place. We have habitat, we have locally adapted fish, we have diverse genetics, we have high demonstrated resiliency, and we have cold water refugia. So how are salmon going to survive this uncertain future of climate change? Well, here's a quote. In increasingly volatile environments facing increasingly volatile futures, it is prudent to promote and maintain diverse life history portfolios. We have those. Salmon are buffered by behavioral and life history diversity. Restoring numbers is a priority because it increases buffering. So the take-home message here is, despite all the bad news, wild, locally adapted Idaho salmon are best suited to adapt to an uncertain future. And the more they are, the more buffering, the more persistence, the more likely they will recover and be sustained. And what once was can be again. Steelhead as big as your children. And if we recover these stocks, it'll not only recover ecosystem productivity and function, but also immense economic, cultural, and recreational values, because salmon are a keystone species in these environments. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Truly an amazing species, truly amazing resiliency, and truly those connections are so important to our region, the communities here. And Chantel, maybe you could speak a little bit about that, about the role that salmon play in the Nez Perce tribal culture, and then how does your work today on renewable energy benefit both the fish and the communities that you work with?
Yes, thank you. And then to save time, I'm going to be a little bit strategic on my answering here. But salmon and fish have always been central to the culture and traditional diets of the Nez Perce tribe. It's our way of life to protect, preserve, and to continue on the fight for salmon recovery. So throughout the treaty making, a little bit of education along with the work of the Nez Perce tribe, where we established our own Department of Fisheries. It's one of the leading fisheries in the country, and they've also been honored as a leading manager in hatchery, where they also they fight for recovery, where we introduce at least 10,000 salmon and steelhead annually every year. And that's led by Dave Johnson with our fisheries department, and he has a lot of respect, and he does amazing work in our community and for our hatcheries and our fisheries department. But a little bit of history. Throughout the treaty-making process, the Nez Perce tribe retained the inherent rights to fish usual and accustomed fishing areas and to hunt and gather and graze livestock on open and unclaimed lands. All outside of the reservational boundaries, these off-reservation inherent rights have been upheld on numerous occasions in state court cases, citing treaty rights as the supreme law of the land. We have practiced our traditional ecological knowledge and balance since time immemorial. You do not take more than what's needed, and you do not waste. Seasonal fishing happens all year and is highly regulated. Our fishing is for ceremonial, subsistence, and commercial purposes. Our tribe now co-manages hatcheries and sets regulations to maintain the run numbers. Areas of focus are fish abundance objectives, thresholds, hatchery objectives, habitat condition objectives, harvest objectives, and the Nez Perce views with respect to the Federal Columbia River power system dams. From the history of old-time fish wars, jail and court cases that my grandfather, Jesse Greene, and others fought through, to current day, the tribe fights to protect and preserve our natural resources and ways of life. We established one of the largest departments of fisheries in the country, whose sole purpose is fish management. We work with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, CRITFIC, and 3 other Columbia River tribes, states, and the federal government systems. Current day work now includes addressing climate change, which I helped establish a brand new climate change and energy subcommittee for the Nez Perce tribe. Due to human causation and warming temperatures, all the efforts before are now not enough to address the decline in returns. The infrastructure from dams and our current energy systems have increased detrimentally to our overall way of life. The fight today is now through policy and innovative thinking. So what my company is now transitioning out from policy level work. I was able to establish the first solar and energy storage, the Nez Perce or Nimipu Energy initiative originally. It was very inviting to our community, with a cornerstone of being workforce training and development. History of our tribal communities is that we are highly underpoverished communities. So creating jobs, giving the opportunity for our tribal members to get training, hands-on learning. In the time of a pandemic where the rest of the world is losing their jobs, we were hiring, and they were learning how to become solar installers. And now we have 36 solar certified tribal members for the Nez Perce tribe. So with this project, what the Nez Perce tribe is moving forward with is a cooperative, and this is what I'm promoting is for both tribal and non-tribal, and with my company I can do both. So I'm currently working on tribal contracts and building bridges with non-tribal organizations to our tribal communities. So working together is how we can actually achieve goals like 5,311. Together we can do that with partnership and collaboration. So a little bit further, and I'm going to try to be quick about this. Xexus, which means Greene and Nez Perce. Xexus Green Energy LLC is a 100% Native American and women-owned consulting company. The role Xexus Green Energy plays in is to duplicate the work completed for the Nez Perce tribe and to develop renewable energy projects. From solar contracts to sustainable housing projects and promoting food sovereignty, we are linking non-tribal companies and organizations to tribal communities to partner and share resources. Continuing to developments and helping transition energy storage for other tribes and now also non-tribal companies looking to go green is the work we do. Xexus Green Energy's mission is to serve us to address climate change and natural resource issues, promote eco-justice, help develop mitigation strategies, lower energy consumptions, improve environmental health while boosting workforce training and development, utilizing sustainable methodology and having sustainable solutions. With a holistic approach, incorporating and sharing traditional ecological knowledge, we design and utilize sustainable methodology to help address increased rates of climate change, support supply and demand, technology, business, and behavior. We design projects for a sustainable future. Like storytelling, we have to share how to do the work and have to teach others. Through Xexus, we have created a partnership with Community Rebuilds out of Moab, Utah, that connects students to technical STEM education, workforce development, training programs to provide existing and potential workers with the skills to improve employability and encourage entrepreneur-owned business development in different STEM trades and services in the effort of affordable earth-built or straw bale houses. These are free STEM learning opportunities currently being provided to our tribal community. There are so many different lenses to look at energy with and different approaches. Future plans are to help my own Nez Perce tribe establish its own utility authority with the assistance of Department of Energy and Department of Energy and Minerals, both of which I have already had great conversations with, as well as other tribes that have also established their own utility company of their own. Innovative technology is moving faster than anyone can keep up. However, as it changes, we have to learn to change and adapt with it. Having these abilities as tribal people is what we have with us, so that makes us resilient. Like my grandfather, Ipsis Nous, we are still fighting and working toward protecting our way of life, just in different ways. In the article that I wanted to share before, which I can discuss further with folks afterwards, Greene family of Lapwai isn't willing to let an Indian way of life vanish. He states in this article, if we had the power to remove dams, this fight lives on through and is the cornerstone of the work Xexus Green Energy LLC will continue to do. Xexus, in the Nez Perce language, is green, and I would like to leave off with a quote from my auntie. Fishing is a livelihood that promotes cultural appropriate economic development. Sherry Greene, my auntie, the Nez Perce fisherwoman on the Columbia River.
Thanks, Chantel. I mean, it's so inspiring, the way you're bringing in that responsibility for the past, that responsibility for the future, and the vision that you have in moving the efforts of the tribe and connecting with the community throughout the whole West, as you described. Jim, given what we've heard here from Chantel and Russ, where do the lower Snake River dams fit into the picture when we think about regional energy transition? And what kind of trends could we look to that are helping to build the region's resiliency in the face of salmon, climate change, and the energy transition?
Thanks. I will get to that. If my role is to enumerate the place of the Snake River dams in the current energy system, it's worth pausing for a minute and highlighting what you just heard from these two, because you will not get a more coherent articulation of a frustrating problem statement and an inspiring solution than you've just heard from Russ and Chantel. It makes me wonder, do the numbers really matter for where the Snake River dams fit in this energy system? 30 years ago, this summer, I started guiding in central Idaho, and that summer, or shortly thereafter, I met Russ when he landed in a tiny little helicopter counting fish reds or their absence. It looked like a snow globe with rotors. And they parked it on the side of the river near our camp, and I got talking to Russ, and it was actually a bit of a gut punch meeting him. He was kind of the original buzzkill for me because I knew central Idaho wilderness as a form of ideal, and you learn very quickly that the place is actually being hollowed out. And I have seen him give a version of this presentation so many times. And I want to note and appreciate the burden that he carries for over 3 decades, along with his colleagues, clearly stating what is happening, why it is happening, and what we need to do about it in hopes that somebody will act. And that is a tremendous responsibility, and I'm enormously grateful for it. And then, Chantel, thank you for acting. Like, for the first time, we can really imagine what the alternative looks like, what it would mean to create not only a clean energy system, but a distributed energy system and distributed economic benefits. Listening to you talk reminds me of a quote I love, or an idea I love, from Wendell Berry, who said that intelligence is strongly placed in the minds of communities and in a direct relationship to the ecosystems, to the ecological fabric of a place. And I have always thought about that concept in the context of salmon, which are kind of the ultimate expression of place as an energy system, how their riotous abundance is a function of their extraordinary diversity because of all the different habitats that they leave from and return to. But hearing what the Perce are trying to do with an electrical energy system is very much the same concept. And so thank you for showing us the way towards an intelligent energy system in the future. And I can only hope, perhaps beyond reason or historical evidence, that the federal system, the Federal Power Marketing Authority, would dedicate itself to helping fulfill a vision like that. So I'll walk you through why I think that's possible really quickly. This is a map, picture of a map that has been at my desk for as long as I can remember. This is the federal agency's representation of Pacific Northwest rivers. It is actually fairly accurate. The way we have turned a vast network of living systems essentially into a circuit board. The Columbia River Basin is one of the most hydroelectrically engineered river systems on Earth. We've essentially converted a biological energy system into an electrical energy system. About 50 miles of the Columbia, the non-tidal Columbia in the United States, flow freely. Water that is released for purposes other than mechanical work is referred to as spill, as if it's both unfortunate and temporary. The river is almost completely abstracted. And I want you to hold this image in mind, not just for this presentation, but going forward when you interact with conversations about the lower Snake River dams, because there's a sleight of hand that will frequently get used in conversations about the dams and salmon, in which hydropower broadly and dams broadly are proxy for the specific value proposition of the lower Snake River dams. Hydropower is a cornerstone of decarbonization efforts. Hydropower has unique balancing and flexibility attributes. All those things are true. And we have plenty of it. We're good on hydropower. There are 280 hydropower dams in the Columbia Basin alone. When the 4 lower Snake River dams come out, there will be 276. We have plenty to work with. This image shows the relationship between the Snake River dams in purple at the bottom, the federal hydro system in blue, and then other resources on the federal hydro system, including the nuke plant and wind. The dotted line in the middle is demand on the federal system. That is the preferred contracted load of customers of the federal system. As you can see, in almost all times of the year, hydropower alone is enough to meet the needs of the region. The lower Snake River dams in purple, in addition to just being a relatively small percentage of the overall supply of the system, about 3 to 4%, is almost perfectly mismatched to seasonal demand. in that they generate about half of their electricity, annual electricity, in the 4 months when there's a problematic spring surplus. And the Bonneville Power Administration is dumping power into a wholesale market that's increasingly dominated by lower price renewables. When we need power the most, late summer and in the winter, it's not as available from the system. Everything above the dotted line, all of that surplus power, what's sold into wholesale markets, is also really important to keep in mind because the federal statutes governing the creation of the federal power system and the governance of the federal power system are unambiguous that the benefits are supposed to confer to this region with a priority to whatever is going on elsewhere. And while we can all celebrate regionalism, the ability to share resources, particularly clean energy resources, before the federal system goes searching for new markets broadly in the West, we might clean up our mess here at home. These are two statements from Bonneville about how their wholesale market revenues are hurting in an age of distributed renewables. I'm going to skip over that and talk just briefly about climate change, which sort of amplifies the urgency and opportunity that we have here. We absolutely have to reconnect the high elevation, cold water wilderness here in Idaho to the ocean. We have to at least partially unknot that umbilical cord between the sea and what will be Noah's Ark for salmon in a warming world. And we absolutely have the ability to do that. There is no technical obstacle to replacing 4 aging dams that require 140 linear mile footprint to generate less than 1,000 average megawatts a year, half of which is dumped into a problematic surplus and the other half which is easily replaced by resources better aligned for the seasonal system, for the seasonal load. And what the Nez Perce are trying to do is the future of those kinds of energy systems, and we need to lean into that with everything we've got.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you very much. Well said. We are really unfortunately short on time, and this is such an enormous topic and so important to the region and to the future. Fortunately, we're backing up on lunch, and I believe, and there's opportunity, I would say, please to approach the speakers and ask questions. They're contributing so much. We talked just earlier this week about the importance of legacy, both the legacy that we carry forward in the way that we need to preserve the salmon and ensure their return to abundance into the Snake River and into the salmon, and the legacy that we leave for the future in our communities and to the world. So thank you again. Please would everyone give a warm thanks to the panel for joining us today.